Afternoon, everyone. So we're going to get going with the second last of the GDI lecture series. We just once ago up in June, the Cotton Capital event. So brilliant to have Naomi Hossain with us here. Naomi is a professor, not an ordinary professor of research, professor. I'm now teaching at SOAS for about the last year after working at the American University and for many years before that, IDS. Frack as well.
Black, yeah.
In between. An expert on the politics of development in Bangladesh, but also having worked on around 20 countries, a much broader research focus on the contentious politics of public services as well. I don't know anything about Naomi's recent work. If you follow Naomi on Twitter, you can expect that it's going to be interesting, provocative, I should imagine. As she has been for many years, always choosing more cutting-edge and interesting research ideas than I'd managed to land on. I owe my first ideas of how to understand the politics of development in Uganda to Naomi. She'd just been working on elites and poverty in Bangladesh and a bigger project with Mignor and others. And I think you sent me through your questionnaire and I essentially borrowed it. Thanks for that. So, I was looking back at your publications. It seems roughly every 5 years we collaborate and do something.
We do something honestly feel like
could people into that as well. So I know nothing about this topic. So I'm glad we've got some digital experts as well as Bangladeshi experts and some people on me and a bit about politics. So Naomi's going to talk for about 40 minutes on the politics of complaint, something she's worked on before, but not as far as I'm aware on the digital aspects.
Yeah.
So new stuff for about 40 minutes, then lots of time for Q&A. So really sadly with us, Naomi.
Thank you very much. So thank you so much for letting me come and talk to us. Love to see old friends and new friends and so on. I just going to say one thing, which is today is the anniversary of Rana Plaza. I don't know if people know about Rana Plaza. And so this is very much on my mind. I think about these things a lot. And, you know, they do have, one of the things they've done since Rana Plaza in factories in Bangladesh is introduce complaints mechanisms so that workers can let brands know if they think factories are unsafe. So these are all of my work always seems to me to be really, really scattered, and then I remember, no, actually there are connections here in these things. But today is quite a special day, quite a sad day for those of us who work on these issues. But I'm really pleased to be here talking to you about this stuff. And really, my aim really today is partly to try to persuade you, also to try to persuade myself that these are interesting issues to research. And also, I think we need to pick your brains a bit and to see what, you know, I'm particularly not very techie, not very good on the digital side. And this work has really dragged me much more into questions of digitalization and the platformization of everything. Than I would like, because I don't really know how to deal with this stuff. So I'm partly here to get your advice on where and how to take this forward. Nimesh and I have been in some conversations with our colleagues Anu Joshi at IDS and Suchi Fadle at American University in Washington, D.C. And we are developing a project proposal on complaints mechanisms. And so partly also this talk is me trying to work through what are some of the research questions? What are some of the analytical frameworks that we need to bring into this? So that's what I'm going to cover, a bit of the background, where this comes from, what all of these things mean, why this matters, what evidence there is so far. And I want to talk a little bit about a project that we did last year before in Bangladesh about how the government responded during COVID, which looked at complaints mechanisms. And then tell you a bit about what I'm thinking of, what we are thinking of in terms of going forward with this. And there is some kind of, people familiar with this meme here? Is this an American thing only? I was living in America for a long time. So this is, nobody knows this one, huh? So this is Karen. So Karen this is a US meme, and Karen is a upper middle class white woman who complains usually about people of color who are service providers of various kinds, and she always has this hairstyle. And a Karen is a social media thing, and it's I think this is very. My daughter says I'm a Karen. not thinking too bad. I think Sam has actually seen me in operation. But yeah, I have been known to make a complaint or two. But it's very much, I think it's really important to reflect on the fact that it's very much in the cultural ether that, people who complain are really bad people and really annoying people and so on. I actually think this lets companies get off the hook rather. But there's another aspect to complaint and why complaint is there in the cultural ether, which is that, especially since Me Too, the Me Too movement, there's been a whole huge wave of discussion about how do you go about making complaints. Sarah Ahmed's absolutely amazing book, Complaint, really takes apart the complaints mechanisms, the sexual harassment complaints mechanisms in universities. And she shows really quite convincingly, in my opinion, that they are designed essentially to protect institutions. And if you complain, you are the problem. The complainant is the problem. So it's kind of serious and unserious at the same time. It's very much part of public discourse, I think, the idea of complaint and the fact of complaining. But also in my own research, these issues have come up a lot. I do tend to kind of hear things when I'm out and about talking to people, and then they sort of sit in my head for a few years, and then Sam gets a grant and gives me some money to go and do some research, and then I have time to write a paper about it. And some of these issues have come up in this way a little bit, I think. Hi, come on in, if you want to. So I'll read.
Seminars about the qualities of complaint.
Oh yeah, that'll do. Yeah, but and so I've done a lot of research over the years on people looking for social protection, people not getting access to social protection when they want it, people complaining about bad public services, bad schools, teachers not there, doctors not there, about social accountability, which, as you know, is citizens monitoring public service delivery in various ways. Many, many years ago, I did some work on something called rude accountability, which is pretty much what it sounds like, people using, shaming, essentially, to try to get access to services. But also a lot of work on protests, which is also a form of complaint, a more collective and a more contentious form of complaint, but nevertheless a form of complaint. And then also if you spend enough time hanging out with development wallahs like I do, you will see that these formal complaints mechanisms are popping up everywhere. You see them in humanitarian programs a lot. There's a whole agenda around accountability in aid programs, humanitarian aid. You see them a lot in multilateral aid programs. The World Bank is obsessed with them. I've got a cute little video I'm going to show you about what they're doing. In civic tech, all of the kind of digital governance agenda. Various public sector reform initiatives have these complaints mechanisms. And more recently, I think we see in the green accountability area, green accountability, the idea being that somehow if people are able to register complaints and ask for redress, that this will somehow move us towards some form of climate justice. And I think the Global Partnership for Social Accountability out of the World Bank is talking a lot about green accountability. And a large part of this is about people being able to say, I have been adversely affected by climate change and I need redress of some kind. But defining these complaint systems is a bit more tricky. And this is a definition from a literature review that I wrote with Anu Joshi from IDS, Suchipande from American University last year, 2023 is last year, which is, I think it's open access. Yes, it's open access. And that really reviews the literature such as it is. We found that literature had really ballooned in the last 10 years, but it was all a bit descriptive and a bit, descriptive, I think is the kindest thing to say about it. Mostly. There's a few exceptions to that. Gabby Crooks-Wisner has done really amazing work. But they are, when we think about them conceptually and institutionally, they're related to a lot of other aspects of governance that we often talk about. So feedback mechanisms, problem solving, the whole area of, what do you call it? PDIA, problem-driven iterative adaptation, is that right? So the kind of development management speak. Who is that? That's your friend Matt Andrews or others, yeah. So that whole area. Is that your kind? Are you into that stuff, David? A bit, yeah. So development manager, it's like you were development manager already. So that area, but also claims making, which is a much more political area. And Gabby Crooks, whom I mentioned just now, she's got a really nice little book out, one of those Cambridge Elements series, I think, earlier this year on claims making with some other colleagues, I think. And also, of course, it touches on these issues of accountability. Now, I hate diagrams like this, but I know Sam really likes them, so I put it. It's a 2x2, but it gives you a sense of where these grievance redress mechanisms, as we really focus on them, are situated. So somewhere between the socio-political and the techno-administrative, somewhere between citizens demanding things and states responding, somewhere between the political and the managerial. And so they're situated in a kind of interesting space for analytical work, also for programmatic work. If you want to, influence the way governments are governing, it's actually quite an interesting entry point. We see, though, I think a lot of, for me, this is really obvious to me, this area, the politics of claims making is very much more self-evident. And then, of course, for the Davids and the Matt Andrews of this world and the World Bank people, it's more that area. But grievance redress mechanisms kind of encompass more of those, really, I think. And they're in that, somewhere in between. So why do they matter in development? Well, first, when you start looking for them, you'll see they are everywhere. They're in all of the programs. And this is partly because, as of 2018, as part of their citizen engagement agenda, the World Bank now requires them in every project. They have to have a grievance redress mechanism in every single project. But another reason that I think they're interesting and they're massive to development is what Gabby says, that they are actually a way of making citizenship. This is her work in India in relation to, I think it was police complaints systems. I think that's what it was. I can't remember now. But essentially the idea is that when you complain, you are making yourself a citizen. You're demanding from the state. You're putting yourself forward. You're saying, I have rights. I am a person with rights. You have violated my rights. It is time for me to get something back. The other thing that Anu and Suchi and I say, we think that these systems actually do have some quite radical democratic potential. And I think, on the one hand, we say this. On the other hand, we're all very, very deeply cynical. We've all had an experience of complaining. I was trying to get pets at home to take back a 20-kilo bag of dog food that they sent me by mistake the other day. You should just see. I mean, it's just insane. It's just impossible. I thought I was going mad trying to phone them. Their website doesn't work. But, so we're all very cynical about complaint systems. But actually, when you think about it, it's quite dramatic. It could be some completely poor, absolutely powerless person has the right to go to and charge some very senior civil servant government person with not having done their duty, to actually write it down and put it into a system, and somebody is supposed to take action on this front. So there is radical democratic potential there. In principle, anyway, the potential is there. So I just wanted to show you this. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this, but I thought this was so World Bank. I just think it's really cute. It will give you a sense of where all of this is coming from. Will the sound work? It doesn't really matter if it doesn't, actually, because it has me, Nadia. Today is a good day for Nadia. Her house is being repaired and the water pipe has been fixed. A few months ago, the construction of a road through her village was causing damage to houses. He has on the village of the water pipe. The road will take villagers to the market, the clinic, and to a new school the local government is building with the support of the World Bank. The villagers were excited about the project, but also needed the damages repaired. The village chief went to complain to the contractor, who told him to use the project grievance mechanism put in place by the governor's project implementing agency. A government official heard the chief's complaint, but the chief wanted further discussion on the proposed compensation, so the village chief contacted the World Bank's Grievance Redress Service. The Grievance Redress Service, or GRS,
This is a channel for people to directly contact the World Bank if they believe that a World Bank-supported project has adversely affected them. The GRS facilitates a prompt response to grievances by providing support to World Bank task teams. It seeks to ensure the bank's responsiveness and accountability by working with project-affected communities to identify problems and solutions. The GRS reached out to the task team to come up with some options for a resolution, which the task team then shared with the government. The government implementing agency took these options to the village community of a contractor. They discussed a plan of action. A solution was found. The contractor accepted to repair the houses, and the government set a budget to urgently upgrade the water pipe. So through dialogue, bringing together all the parties involved, the villagers' complaints were resolved. And today is a good day for Nadia. Her house is fixed, the water is running, and the new school is ready.
Isn't that just perfect? So that's how the World Bank things work. It's very nifty. It's interesting. Normally you can find a real life video of this stuff. Anything you want, when you're teaching, right? You find can't find any real life videos of anyone saying anything good about GRS. I can't find anything. So all I could find was this animation. And this, I think, is a very good explanation of how the World Bank things are working, or should work. This, by the way, says complaint box. As you can see, it's see-through. And then, apart from some dead flies, there's nothing in it. We have these across Bangladesh. I think I've seen similar from other countries as well. But what we know about these complaints mechanisms is that they are the kind of the child of new public management and citizen engagement and the accountability to development for sure. And they come very much, I think, from a sense of the private sector customer service agenda, and the idea that this will somehow improve public services if people can complain. There's a lot of slippage in definitions and meanings in the literature. I think now that the World Bank has taken this concept on, it will get more firmed up in the development practice. Whether it will affect the literature, I don't know. Some of it is ornamental. It's, you'll go to a project, you'll say, do the people like this? And they'll say, well, we have a complaints box over here, or we have a hotline. You can just phone if you don't like it. So there is quite a lot of that goes on. And we see quite a lot of that also with the World Bank projects. And there is a very strong emphasis on surfacing problems much more than on responding, which can be very frustrating for people to have to always complain and never feel that they personally are getting their problem solved. And that's partly because we find that the administration is rarely empowered, rarely resourced or authorized to respond to complaints that surface. And we also see in the literature review that there are some successful systems. Indonesia has one called Lapor that has been successful at different times. I think Nepal's, still on something. Nepal's Hello Sarkar, I don't know, is it still going? Hello Sarkar? Yeah, it is still going. So that's kind of uneven, I think, isn't it? But it's popular. It is. Whether it achieves anything, yeah, I think this is the interesting thing. So we don't really know what happens to them. Do they go to scale? And if they do go to scale, do they get sustained? There was a really good one for the water board in Kenya, in Nairobi, I think at one point, but seems to have disappeared. It was very successful. Everyone loved it, and then it's disappeared now. Where it's gone, we don't know. So there's lots of things we don't know. One thing we really don't know is why governments set them up. All these governments have them. It's quite astounding. Why would you set these up when you're just setting yourselves up to be complained about? It's interesting the Chinese government appears to have elaborate systems for feedback, including complaint. We found one great article which looked at the Soviet-era Bulgarian government, which said explicitly that the reason they have these very elaborate complaint systems was because they wanted to know what people would say. So they wanted to head off any concerns before they got people got too angry about it. We don't really know whether they work or what it even means for it to work. If the government sets it up to listen, is it enough that they're able to listen? Does it have to actually lead to a response, a successful response? We don't know. We don't know how people use them. Where they do, we don't know if they feed back into policy change. And one thing we really don't know is why governments are so obsessed with putting them on digital platforms when we know that, the vast majority of people in the global south don't use smartphones, are not digitally literate and so on and so forth. So why are governments so obsessed with putting all of this into their digital platforms? It can't all be their brother-in-law's, digital companies making money. There must be some other reasons that we don't quite understand yet. We decided we would go and have a look at some of these issues in Bangladesh. This was a project that was run out of a grant that IDS in Sussex had from FCDO. And we decided that, it was interesting during COVID that the Bangladesh government seemed to really innovate really fast. They're really good at that. They like a good crisis in Bangladesh. They tend to learn fast and improve in various ways. What we saw in Bangladesh was, we knew that there were certain things were there that would be interesting to explore. So, drawing very much on the ESID work, we recognize that Bangladesh is a dominant political settlement, even more dominant now than it was when we were doing the ESID work back then. But that dominance has come with a very strong emphasis on performance and legitimacy. They really had to deliver during COVID, which was, of course, very, very difficult and scary for everyone involved. And they do have that strong track record of learning from disasters. They'd also, before COVID, put in place a lot of reforms which were, I was talking to David about this over lunch, a bit like, one of my colleagues, Zahir Ahmed, is an anthropologist at Jahangir, said, it's like the government of Bangladesh has become an NGO. The way they engage with the citizens has become very much more participatory, much more inclined to listen, much less colonial style, top down, telling you how it's going to be. It's like we're your friend now. So they developed all these reforms that are supposed to make them more like that. And so when COVID hit, they were in a pretty good place. Oh, and they also have all of these really, see this picture, I love all this stuff. All of these free, ambitious digitalization agendas. The latest one is called Smart Bangladesh, and they have these visions of incredible technology. It's another whole story I will talk about another time. It's quite fascinating. Bangla futurism, there's even somebody wrote about flying cars. I kid you not. It's very sweet. But anyway, in COVID, there were all these efforts to listen, and we thought this was a very interesting thing. I was working with a bunch of public administration specialists in the University of Rajshahi, and they were looking very locally at what was going on. There were a lot of efforts. There was a lot of very, very fast digitalization of government. But the really impressive thing, I think, was the development of lots of different kinds of hotlines and online mechanisms and platforms for listening. Local officials and local politicians were using Facebook a lot to get information about people, to get feedback about what was going on. So we asked these sorts of questions. How were they gathering feedback? How did they, encourage response by the local government? And there was a lot of discretion was given to local government. And what did they learn about the value of citizen feedback? Keep in mind, this is a very closed polity. It's a one-party state. The media is not free anymore. Social media is very, very closely policed. So it's kind of very constrained citizen feedback, but nevertheless, they want to listen. So we found that there were all these mechanisms in place. There a very ambitious digitalization agenda was there, but uneven. That, in fact, the informal and face-to-face communications, the kind of rude accountability, if you like, was still very, very important. And all of the aid donor requirements, they got $1.5 billion or whatever of World Bank loans, which required all these grievance redress mechanisms. They weren't really being followed at all. The donors let them all off the hook for that. But all of this was going on. There was stuff going on, for sure. It wasn't amounting to a great deal. But there was one really impressive platform, which was the Shiroka app. And this was the way you registered for the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, Bangladesh, very, very densely populated, very heavily populated, very good track record of immunization, very vertical public health programs. I think they always knew the only way we were going to get out of COVID alive. And even now I'm thinking about this, like, hard to remember 4 years ago how we were feeling, how we were thinking. Can you remember how it felt, how scared we were? So 4 years ago, I think there was government people saying, shit, they better get a vaccine soon. And then if they get a vaccine, we will survive. And they did. And they had this really quite impressive app. In our survey, in our nationally representative survey, almost everyone had the vaccine. A huge number of them had registered through the app. And this app was then used when people were complaining that there's no vaccine here, or that person didn't get it, or that person went ahead of me in the queue, whatever it was, they managed to resolve it through this app, which I think the Army and some others were involved in developing at high speed. So that's an issue that somebody's going to have to study. It's probably not going to be me, but somebody's going to have to study that and find out why that worked so well, why that was so good. We asked other things, though. We asked about how did you complain about the other health services and about the social protection? Because the government handed out loads of cash and loads of digital cash, of course, like they did in most places, to help people out. And there we found it was quite interesting that, people on the whole were very, very pleased that the government was listening to them, that they had all these hotlines. There were like 20 or 30 different hotlines you could call. They were pleased about it. They thought it was good. They thought the government was, doing it with sincerity. At the same time, they didn't actually think that they did much with the feedback. And they really, really would much prefer to go and talk to somebody in person if there was a problem. Much, by a long, long way. They would much prefer to do that. So I think this was a bit of a wake-up call. We did actually share these findings with the A2I, which is this digital unit that's attached to the Prime Minister's office. And I think they know this, but they're very keen, nonetheless, to digitalize heavily. So we kind of, we're left with some questions. What is the time, by the way? No, I'm nearly done. Really? I don't have that much more to say. We're now thinking through what these things, I can talk to you more about this stuff. For me, this is very interesting. The social protection is particularly interesting. And I think, those of us who worked in Bangladesh, David and Nikki will know for sure that, the complaints about social protection are really like all-consuming. People will complain and complain, but they will do so face-to-face. And there's very little in the way of institutionalized mechanisms for doing anything about it. And so you see, they do have these hotlines. This tiny, tiny number of people would actually bother to phone up the 555 and say, you know what, so-and-so got it and she's richer than I am, which is, the kind of complaint you'd make. But they have always done, and they continue to do, going to the local government official, the chairman or the member of their local council to complain. So this remains the practice. This is how people want to do it. I think that this was not very welcome to the government when we told them this. However, we did tell them also that there were too many hotlines and people were kind of slightly bewildered by not knowing where to go, where to register their complaints. Every department, every project, every unit has their own platform, and we said this is just too much. You should consolidate, or at least you should look at it. Look at consolidating like other countries have done. They apparently have done this now. They now have one hotline where you call and you can register everything. It's still, when I look at the health sector, the complaints mechanisms in the health sector, it's very elaborate and looks very good. You can see it in real time. What's being complained about is mostly there's no doctor, there's no drugs, the clinic is really dirty. It's the same thing again and again. We don't know whether the message is getting to the health ministry that they need to make sure there are more doctors, there are more drugs, and that they clean the facilities. Whether that's actually changing policy yet, we don't know. But at the same time, it's a very small proportion of the entire population of 170 million. They're in the tens of thousands of complaints. The population of 170 million, it's nothing. It means that nobody's doing it. Essentially, a handful of guys with a smartphone possibly are making complaints. So we have questions now that we would like to explore more. in future with this sort of research. We want to understand more about why it is that governments are doing this. You know, I say the government of Bangladesh is a dominant party. They are very keen on showing they are performing for the people. So is this genuinely them trying to say, look, tell us what's wrong and we'll fix it? Are they really trying to improve their services? Or is it something else? Is there some other reason why these have become so important? Is it some kind of sense of control that they have as policymakers? This kind of, I always think of it as a dashboard mentality. I'll have all this data and then I will be able to govern, I will be able to do policy from my nice air-conditioned office. I'm not quite sure. We're really interested to know. But it seems to be all kinds of governments in all kinds of places are doing this. Some faith in the power of data seems to be going on here. But at the same time, there is a literature that suggests that the whole digitalization agenda is about turning us into particular kinds of citizens, particular kinds of governable citizens. And, in a country like Bangladesh, where still a lot of the population doesn't read and write that well, it's interesting to see the use of smartphones really has encouraged people to learn their numbers and learn their letters and so on, and to use, to be more literate. I think that's part of it. Technology in general, I think, is partly it. Governments want us to be more technologically savvy. But I think probably another really big point about these mechanisms is that when you digitalize discontent, you separate people and they're all individually looking at handheld screens and putting in our problems here. And what we're not doing is going down to the clinic in our hundreds and thousands and complaining and setting fire, which has been a practice in Bangladesh for many years when you've complained about health services in the past. So it's a way of controlling, it's a way of governing people's discontent, I think. Certainly the individualization of your problems with public services is interesting. When you think about it yourself, if you've ever made a complaint and you didn't get a response, you're like, well, I probably didn't send it to the right person and I didn't fill in the form correctly and I didn't press that button, or maybe I did. It's always me who did it wrong, isn't it? It's not that the system has failed, but essentially they're impenetrable systems. We did this work, and this was one of your projects, Sam, for it was with Tom, the social assistance program. And we found that this long-standing cash program that they had for children in Bangladesh to go to school, a cash, what do you call it? Thank you, conditional cash transfer program. We found that they'd very overnight decided it was all going to be digital and it was going to be universal. But there was no complaints mechanism anymore because the people who used to go and give you the cash were no longer there. So how will you complain when you don't get it, but it doesn't appear on your phone? You can't access it. So this was the real problem. Suddenly it was this invisible, faceless. How do you complain about the system? How do you complain about the Bcash or whatever the cash platform was? So this is it takes your complaint off into the ether. It's very hard to know what to do. I think we don't really understand yet how successfully these can work. We said there's dramatic, radical democratic potential, but we don't know if they work. We don't know how they work. We don't know the extent to which they do. We have ideas. Like we look at India, for instance, and there's a lot of examples of how the movements and the social actors have really, got involved with these systems and really tried to push them forward. But we don't know yet whether those can be replicated beyond that. Can they feed back into policy improvements? It should work. The World Bank thinks it works. We think digitalization will make complaint probably harder, even though it's supposed to make it easier. And I think there's a really good question about whether or not these are just really systems for surveillance. Certainly, the fact that the Chinese government likes these makes me think it's a way of knowing what your people are doing. Is it a way of using this data for some other purposes? I think it's interesting to ask. And then a question for you all is, what should we be reading? What should we be studying to know more about how to take this forward as an agenda? And there we have it. Thank you.